They do. They really do appreciate. Why the Russia-Ukraine crisis just got much worse. Start here.
Hi, everyone. There's a lot going on with Russia and Ukraine, so we thought we'd jump on to answer a few questions and help you get your head around.
Oh, this was awesome. Dude, by the way, if you want to understand, maybe you're thinking, because we live in like a hyper fucking, we live in like this echo chamber. We live in a weird echo chamber where we think like everyone else feels like the way that we do. So everyone must be constantly talking about Russia. Everyone must be constantly talking about Ukraine. Everyone must have like a well-established position on this matter of international importance, right? Except that's not the case, as we know. 26% of the country, what? Goalpost? 26% of the country, I think, believes that we should have major involvement in Ukraine. I think more people want minimal involvement, but ultimately, most people just don't care, right? Most normal people do not give a fuck. That's not a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just stating that, like, most Americans don't give a fuck. Now, the reason why most Americans don't give a fuck is because of people like Tucker Carlson, who recognize that most Americans don't give a fuck and then do a very good job of propagandizing against it. I'm not saying this is the adequate position to take here. Please do not misunderstand me. I'm saying that Tucker Carlson is a villainous, vicious propagandist, okay? Very, very fucking good at taking any sort of fucking situation and churning out hyper-nationalistic, right-wing propaganda.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Since the day that Donald Trump became president, Democrats in Washington have told you have a patriotic duty to hate Vladimir Putin. It's not a suggestion, it's a mandate. Anything less than hatred for Putin is treason. Many Americans have obeyed this directive. They now dutifully hate Vladimir Putin. Maybe you're one of them. Hating Putin has become the central purpose of America's foreign policy. It's the main thing that we talk about. Entire cable channels are now devoted to it.
Because you are not in Europe and USA people are just talking with no nonsense. They don't even know what's going on there and how USA manipulate with idiots.
Very soon, that hatred of Vladimir Putin could bring the United States into a conflict in Eastern Europe. Before that happens, it might be worth asking yourself, since it is getting pretty serious, what is this really about? Why do I hate Putin so much? Has Putin ever called me a racist? Has he threatened?
Bro, this is literally the Viet Cong never called me the N-word, but for people who love saying the N-word, by the way. This is Tucker Carlson's, like, incredibly important method. Okay? This is his watershed moment. This is the speech. Okay? You guys know what I'm talking about? The Viet Cong never called me the N-word. It was a prominent attitude that obviously, I mean, it was Muhammad Ali, but it was a prominent attitude expressed by black civil rights activists at the time that were also anti-war activists, and you know, they were anti-imperialist, anti-war activists. Which, by the way, that's actually really funny. Thinking about that, that's one of the instances where the New York Times actually criticized MLK at the time was because of his anti-imperialist attitude towards America in Vietnam. So that was, we never talk about that either. But hey, that was the justifiable right thing to do in that moment, okay? We had to go into Vietnam. So, as I was saying, so this is Tucker Carlson's version of that, but for racist people.
Threatened to get me fired for disagreeing with him? Has he shipped every middle-class job in my town?
Stop comparing yourself to MLK. I would never, ever in a million years compare myself to Martin Luther King. I am just simply stating that, once again, no matter how insignificant, inconsequential, and fucking stupid of a himbo you might be, like myself, okay, as a Twitch streamer himbo, I get ripped apart whenever I talk from an anti-imperialist point of view. That does not mean that I'm like MLK or fancy myself in the same way. Okay? I'm simply stating that, you know, all the way to the top, like people like Martin Luther King, who were actually, you know, incredibly impactful civil rights leaders, all the way down to, it's insane that you have to qualify almost every statement you make. Chatters are wild. Yes, I have a lot of brain diseased and brain broken people in this chat that are looking to interpret every single thing I say in the least charitable position so they can clip it and then ship it onto the internet to make other people also feel exactly that same way. This is my everyday life. Unfortunately, this is the reason why I have to constantly and consistently qualify every single little thing that I say. Otherwise, they will, turn that into another opportunity to destroy me and embarrass me and publicly vilify me. That is precisely why I do that. And they do that. They do it all the time. It's something that everybody fucking despises. It's something that everybody fucking hates when other people do that. But they do it regardless. Isn't Pepega the equivalent of calling someone the R-worded? So why do we use it if so? Because people are R-worded, okay? And sometimes you need a fucking terminology to describe that without using like a medical diagnosis that is now considered to be bad, okay? That's the reason. How do you describe someone with a bad brain? How do you describe someone who is Pepega? What are you going to do? Some people have a smoothened out brain, like as though they are the size and shape and smoothness of a fucking grape. What are you going to do? How do you describe that? How? No wrinkles. They got no wrinkles. Mister, are you brain dead over here? I mean, I say that all the time. I use plenty of ableist pejoratives. Most pejoratives are ableist.
Town to Russia? Did he manufacture a worldwide pandemic that wrecked my business and kept me indoors for 2 years? Is he teaching my children to embrace racial discrimination? Is he making fentanyl? Is he trying to snuff out Christianity? Does he eat dogs? These are fair questions.
Does he eat dogs? What the fuck? What's he saying?
And the answer to all of them is no. Vladimir Putin didn't do any of that. So why does permanent Washington hate him so much? If you've been watching the news, you know that Putin is having a border dispute with a nation called Ukraine. Now, the main thing to know about Ukraine for our purposes is that its leaders once sent millions of dollars to Joe Biden's family. Not surprisingly, Ukraine is now one of Biden's favorite countries. Biden has pledged to defend Ukraine's borders even as he opens our borders to the world. That's how it works. Invading America is called equity. Invading Ukraine is a war crime. So with every day we move closer to some kind of conflict with Russia, conflict that could easily spin out of control, given that the people running this have no fine motor skills. The administration assures us this has nothing at all to do with repaying Joe Biden's personal debts to Ukrainian oligarchs, not at all.
I told you guys that Tucker Carlson's attitude on this is like, we shouldn't hate Russia, we should hate China. Taking away from who we actually should hate, China. Classic. He's like, we should literally be fucking way more aggressive against China. That's the real fear that you should have.
It's completely and totally unrelated. The point here is to defend democracy, not the.
Part of the reason is this, though. Okay, listen, Tucker doesn't give a shit about whether fucking Russia takes over Ukraine or whether Ukraine takes over Russia. He doesn't give a shit about any of that. Okay, first of all, they're Slavs, so obviously Tucker Carlson does not see them as human beings because he's a Nazi. Now, having said all that. Okay. Having said all of that, by the way, maybe someone should tell that to the Ukrainian right sector guys that they are not human in the eyes of Nazis, despite the fact that they want to be Nazi collaborators or LARPA's Nazi collaborators. Anyway, so the real point here is that for most Americans, okay, especially ones that like watch Tucker Carlson and a lot of like Norman Americans, like they don't give a fuck about what's going on in Ukraine. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm simply stating a fact. Okay. Most Americans do not give a fuck. You know who gives a fuck? The media. You know who gives a fuck? The State Department. You know who gives a fuck? Extremely online people who are routinely and regularly watching the news and constantly covering it round the clock and like to debate about it. Other than that, like go ask every fucking average person in your neighborhood what they care. Like they're like, what is there war in Ukraine? Okay. I don't know. Most people do not fucking care. Okay. They don't. And Tucker recognizes that. And is using that to further propagandize his position.
Ukraine is a democracy. It is not a democracy. Ukraine's president has arrested his main political opponent. He has shut down newspapers and television stations that have dared to criticize him. So in American terms, you would call Ukraine a tyranny. But Joe Biden likes Ukraine, so Putin bad, war good. How will this conflict affect you? Well, it'll affect you quite a bit, actually. Energy prices in the United States are about to go way up, and that means that everything you buy will become much more expensive, from the food you eat to the car you drive to tickets you need to take your family on vacation.
The irony, of course, on the other side of this is that, like, the Biden administration has tried to tie back in a post hoc, like in a really silly post hoc way, tie back inflation to the conflict in Ukraine, which is really fucking stupid, because then you got people like Tucker Carlson who are going to be like, then why are you getting us involved in Ukraine and making inflation worse, you fucking idiot? So even though we're past the inflation and the Biden admin is very stupidly trying to fucking tie inflation to Ukraine and Russia, okay? You're literally making yourself worse. You're making yourself look worse because people don't give a fuck. The American citizens don't give a fuck about Ukraine and Russia. And now they're making it seem like, you know, you're giving them an out. You're giving the conservatives extra talking points. Not only does inflation predate our dealings with Russia and Ukraine, but also on top of that, Americans now think you are making it worse.
This summer, assuming you can still afford vacation.
Here, look, the pain will be worth it, Biden and Kamala. The worst, the absolute worst domestic policy strategy. And remember, all those fucking anarchists that are like, you have to vote for Joseph Robinette Biden because it's the lesser evil, okay? It's the lesser evil. You have to vote for them. It's more important. Everything that, defund the police is not a bad idea because ultimately what's more important is like, what's happening in the polls, okay? Vote extra hard. Oh, yeah, shut the fuck up and vote. No anarchists. You know I'm talking about anarchists on the internet. Shut the fuck up. Bread tubers, okay? Those very same people are refusing to recognize that this is a fucking horrible talking point that's going to hurt them in the fucking midterms, okay?
By then, you're about to become measurably poor. That's not a guess. Joe Biden has admitted.
I did also, yes, I said you should vote for Joe Biden as well, while also still maintaining my criticisms against Joe Biden. And then everyone would yell at me and say that I'm wrong for even saying that Joe Biden is bad, and I should be excited to vote for him. But you know how you know how it is.
On the other hand, you're going to win an important moral victory against dastardly old Vladimir Putin, who is much, much worse than Justin Trudeau, just so you know. So you can feel good about that because, let's see, come to think of it, why would you feel good about that? It seems like a pretty terrible deal for you and for the United States. Hunter Biden gets $1 million a year from Ukraine, but you can no longer afford to go out to dinner. That's not a bargain. So what are we missing here? What we're missing is the big picture, and that's why Joe Biden has dispatched Kamala Harris to explain that picture to us. Kamala Harris's old job was to open America's borders. She did that. Her new job is to keep Ukraine's borders closed. Kamala Harris was in Europe the other day to explain the whole thing. She began with a history lesson, letting the European peoples know about their recent past, which she assumes they've forgotten since so few of them speak English. She opened with the traditional salutation, "Listen, guys," because that's the way real historians and statespeople talk. Watch Kamala educate.
I mean, listen, guys, we're talking about the potential for war in Europe. I mean, let's really take a moment to understand the significance of what we're talking about. It's been over 70 years. And through those 70 years, as I mentioned yesterday, there has been peace and security. We are talking about the real possibility of war in Europe.
Dude, she makes this so easy, though. Like, she's just so fucking, like, patently, categorically unlikable, making it so fucking easy for, like, dislike her.
Listen, guys, you may be Europeans who live in Europe, but you don't fully understand the ramifications of war in Europe. That's your problem. The thing about Europe, you've had peace and security for more than 70 years. Kamala Harris just told the Europeans that. And that, by the way, is true if you don't count the breakup of Yugoslavia, which caused hundreds of thousands of deaths in the 1990s, or the Soviet occupation of half of the landmass, which amounted to the enslavement of hundreds of millions. But apart from that, Mrs. Lincoln, it's all been peace and security in Europe. until now. Now, the Soviets were fine. Vladimir Putin is bad. What do we do about that? Kamala Harris explained that too. Watch.
And the allied relationship is such that we have agreed that the deterrence effect of these sanctions is still a meaningful one, especially because, remember also, we still sincerely hope that there is a diplomatic path out of this moment. And within the context then of the fact that that window is still although it is absolutely narrowing, but within the context of a diplomatic path still being open, the deterrence effect, we believe, has merit.
Got that? Take a breath and let it sink in. Here it is again. Quote, "We have agreed that the deterrence effect of these sanctions is still a meaningful one, especially because, remember also, we still sincerely hope that there is a diplomatic path out of this moment, and within the context then of the fact that the window is still open, although it is absolutely narrowing, but within the context of a diplomatic path still being open, the deterrence effect, we believe, has merit." Well, of course it has merit. The only
Crochet class, Tex Montel? What the fuck is that? Is that like the person that they said she fucked to get ahead or whatever? Is that what they're saying? No. Who would right wingers say Kamala Harris like? Oh yeah. Well, not to get ahead, but oh yeah. This is it. Yeah. Montel Williams addresses dating history with Kamala Harris back in 2019. No, yeah. Dude, that's so weird. Like, why are you bringing that up? What the fuck?
The question is, what the hell are you talking about? And the answer is Kamala Harris has no real idea what she's talking about. She can't even point to the direction of what she's talking about. Her mouth opens and predigested chunks of language come tumbling out in no particular order. It's soothing to listen to until you try to understand what it means. As Kamala Harris told us just last month, quote, "It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day." To which we'd respond, "That's right, Ms. Vice President Person, today is the first day of the rest of your life. Learn it, love it, live it, and while you're at it, eat, pray, love."
This is like obviously fucking Garbo, but it's Garbo, but it's effective, okay? It's effective because there's a lot of people who don't give a fuck. They're making the Biden administration come across even more fucking out of touch. All right. Anyway, let's continue.
The basics. Starting with what just happened.
Al Jazeera might.
So on Monday, Russia's President Vladimir Putin officially recognized 2 breakaway areas in eastern Ukraine. Both of them are in the Donbass region. They call themselves the People's Republics of Luhansk and Donetsk, and they've been controlled by pro-Russian separatists since 2014, with Russia's backing. Now, these so-called People's Republics make up around 1/3 of the Ukrainian districts of Luhansk and Donetsk, and there's what's called a line of control, with the separatists on one side and the Ukrainian forces on the other. They've been fighting each other off and on across that line for years, even though there's supposed to be a ceasefire. One thing to keep in mind is that the separatists lay claim to all of Luhansk and Donetsk, not just the 1/3 they control now. And Putin confirmed that Russia's recognition of the independence of these so-called People's Republics also includes their claim to that extra territory. Now, President Putin made another big move. He's ordered Russian soldiers to go into the separatist areas. He says they're peacekeepers.
We've been speaking to people inside the self-declared Republic of Donetsk. They were describing the Russian military build-up as being like nothing they'd seen before. They described tanks, Grad missile systems.
So this is a really big deal because it raises the risk of a direct confrontation between Russian and Ukrainian forces, and that could trigger something even bigger, maybe a full-blown war. Don't forget, Russia looks ready for one. It's been building up troops along Ukraine's border for months. The U.S. reckons there are now up to 190,000 soldiers surrounding Ukraine on 3 sides.
Everything from, of course, the high-end weapon systems to field hospitals to logistics to command and control.
Okay, so next question. Why did Putin make this move in eastern Ukraine? Well, you can answer that on a few different levels. There is the on-the-ground stuff. Putin says Russian speakers and Russian citizens living in eastern Ukraine have been under attack all these years by Ukrainian forces, and they need protection. And recently, separatist leaders started evacuating people to Russia. They accused Ukraine of planning a military operation to retake the territories. But Ukraine rejects that accusation, and the US, NATO, and others think Putin has just been cooking up an excuse to go in.
President Putin made a series of outrageous false claims about Ukraine aimed at creating a pretext for war, and immediately thereafter announced Russian troops are entering the Donbass. He calls them peacekeepers. This is nonsense. We know what they really are.
So why might Putin be willing to consider a war? Well, that takes us to the other thing he's been talking about a lot: NATO, the Western military alliance, and what he feels is an intolerable threat to Russian security. Putin has basically been telling NATO to get out of his neighborhood. He wants guarantees that it will never admit Ukraine as a member and stop any further expansion to the east. NATO says it will never agree to that Ukraine is a sovereign country and that it's not for Russia to decide, even though it's pretty unlikely that Ukraine.
It's not for Russia to decide. It's for Germany to decide, by the way. Like, because that's who's like, yeah, Ukrainians want to fucking join NATO. But, like, it doesn't matter because NATO nations don't want Ukraine to join NATO because of the steady and ongoing threat that Russia presents if Ukraine would join NATO. Why do you keep saying that about Germany? Because Germany doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO. I don't even think, and I said this already, I don't even think America wants Ukraine to join NATO. I think America just wants to fucking dangle NATO membership in front of Ukraine and give them guns and shit and aid, as in loans, so you can fucking buy more aid and American guns to posture against Russia and saber rattle against Russia and throw Ukraine to the fucking dogs.
Would join NATO anytime soon. But here's another thing. When Putin announced Russia's recognition of the breakaway areas, he gave a long, rambling speech complete with his own take on history, which included the idea that Ukraine is part of ancient Russian lands. He essentially questioned the whole legitimacy of Ukraine as an independent country.
Итак, начну с того, что современная Украина целиком и полностью была создана Россией. Точнее, большевистской, коммунистической Россией. Украина, по сути, никогда не имела устойчивой традиции своей подлинной государственности.
The speech by President Putin, the 65-minute long diatribe, many analysts have said it's a declaration of war. He's not invading because it's not a sovereign country. That's his narrative.
Okay, so next question.
I think that part's bullshit. A lot of people have made hay about that, but I don't think he was saying that to be like, all of Ukraine is ours. I think he was saying that to say all of the Ukrainian territories that were that have Russian citizens in them should have never been fucking separated from the motherland, and we will fucking take it if you keep dealing with the West. Like, you want decommunization as a factor? Like, you want to westernize? Substitute decommunization as westernize. That's what that is. It's a threat. It's an active threat against Ukraine if it chooses to continue partnering up with the West against Russia.
Question. What's the response been? Well, from Ukraine and the West, outrage, basically.
Україна однозначно кваліфікує останні дії Російської Федерації як порушення суверенітету та територіальної цілісності нашої держави.
Who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the right to declare new so-called countries on territory that belong to his neighbors? This is a
Only we get to do that.
Flagrant violation of international law.
This is the most dangerous moment in European security for a generation.
And what are they doing about it? Well, for a while now, Western countries have been sending weapons and money to Ukraine. And they've beefed up troop numbers in nearby NATO countries, places like Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states. And now they're hitting Russia with economic sanctions, targeting people and organizations connected to the decision to recognize the breakaway areas, and with links to Russia's military. So, for example, wealthy individuals, politicians, and some banks. Germany's made a big move by suspending the final approval for Nord Stream 2, a major gas pipeline from Russia which has already been built. And Western leaders say they've got even tougher sanctions ready to go if they need them.
Something in reserve in case Putin goes further, because to recognize these two republics, he didn't need more than 150,000 troops, and many fear that there is another stage to his operations.
Okay, so final question. How are Ukrainians feeling about all this? Well, of course, it depends on who you ask and where they live. Some people are scared, but many Ukrainians also seem to be getting on with life as best they can.
People are remarkably calm, actually, and since this whole crisis kicked off, they've been incredibly stoic. And
I wonder why, dude. Bro, this is their life. They live on Russia's doorstep. This has been their fucking lives since day one. That's why. That's the reason. And no matter how much Americans claim that this is different, this time is different, this time is different, like from the perspective of Ukrainian people, it seems like just another day in Ukraine.
in their response, and it kind of runs really counter to the panic that has been splashed across Western headlines. I think there is a kind of level up of panic, but I think it's still so unclear about what's going to happen. So it's so hard to prepare when you don't know what you're preparing for.
Якось не знаю, і бояться, і не бояться, поки немає за що бояться. Ну, щось я дивлюся теж ці передачі, щось розказують, ну, щось не віриться.
The diplomatic here is over, and what I'm gonna say, that's crazy, because we don't want a war.
Так усе надоїло нам от це жити вже за 8 лет. 8 лет це отак не живемо, существуємо.
That's the thing with this crisis. It's not new, but it's definitely gone up another notch. Now, if you were hoping for answers to the biggest questions in all this, what does Putin really want? And how far is he willing to go? Well, there's really only one person who can answer that. Remember, if you want more basics and background info on things like the roots of the conflict in the Donbass region and why Russia has beef with NATO, then check out our earlier episode, linked here.
It's a declaration of war. He's not invading because it's not a sovereign country. That's his narrative.
Okay, so next question.
I think that part's bullshit. A lot of people have made hay about that, but I don't think he was saying that to be like, all of Ukraine is ours. I think he was saying that to say all of the Ukrainian territories that were that have Russian citizens in them should have never been fucking separated from the motherland, and we will fucking take it if you keep dealing with the West. Like, you want decommunization as a factor? Like, you want to westernize? Substitute decommunization as westernize. That's what that is. It's a threat. It's an active threat against Ukraine if it chooses to continue partnering up with the West against Russia.
Question. What's the response been? Well, from Ukraine and the West, outrage, basically.
Україна однозначно кваліфікує останні дії Російської Федерації як порушення суверенітету та територіальної цілісності нашої держави.
Who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the right to declare new so-called countries on territory that belong to his neighbors? This is a
only we get to do that.
This is a
only we get to do that.
Flagrant violation of international law.
This is the most dangerous moment in European security for a generation.
And what are they doing about it? Well, for a while now, Western countries have been sending weapons and money to Ukraine. And they've beefed up troop numbers in nearby NATO countries, places like Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states. And now they're hitting Russia with economic sanctions, targeting people and organizations connected to the decision to recognize the breakaway areas, and with links to Russia's military. So, for example, wealthy individuals, politicians, and some banks. Germany's made a big move by suspending the final approval for Nord Stream 2, a major gas pipeline from Russia which has already been built. And Western leaders say they've got even tougher sanctions ready to go if they need them.
Something in reserve in case Putin goes further, because to recognize these two republics, he didn't need more than 150,000 troops, and many fear that there is another stage to his operations.
Okay, so final question. How are Ukrainians feeling about all this? Well, of course, it depends on who you ask and where they live. Some people are scared, but many Ukrainians also seem to be getting on with life as best they can.
People are remarkably calm, actually, and since this whole crisis kicked off, they've been incredibly stoic. And
I wonder why, dude. Bro, this is their life. They live on Russia's doorstep. This has been their fucking lives since day one. That's why. That's the reason. And no matter how much Americans claim that this is different, this time is different, this time is different, like from the perspective of Ukrainian people, it seems like just another day in Ukraine.
in their response, and it kind of runs really counter to the panic that has been splashed across Western headlines. I think there is a kind of level up of panic, but I think it's still so unclear about what's going to happen. So it's so hard to prepare when you don't know what you're preparing for.
Якось не знаю, і бояться, і не бояться, поки немає за що бояться. Ну, щось я дивлюся теж ці передачі, щось розказують, ну, мені щось не віриться.
The diplomatic here is over, and what I'm gonna say, that's crazy, because we don't want a war.
Так усе надоїло нам от це жити вже за 8 лет. 8 лет це отак не живемо, существуємо.
That's the thing with this crisis. It's not new, but it's definitely gone up another notch. Now, if you were hoping for answers to the biggest questions in all this, what does Putin really want? And how far is he willing to go? Well, there's really only one person who can answer that. Remember, if you want more basics and background info on things like the roots of the conflict in the Donbass region and why Russia has beef with NATO, then check out our earlier episode, linked here.